Okay, so welcome back to our lessons on Commercialization Academy. And what we're going to be covering today is the art of the pivot. And first we're going to define what pivot means. Pivot means is you're working on your company and you're going down that company and you realize you hit a roadblock. And then you say, okay, how do I go forward? I've been going forward down this one path and I hit a wall. I got to pivot right or I got to pivot left. I have to go one direction or the other. I can't keep going forward. That can destroy your business. You lose all your momentum. Your investors lose confidence in your thought process. Your employees lose confidence in the business. It can be detrimental. So what we want to look at is how do we avoid that particular catastrophe? How do we avoid running into that wall? Okay, so when we look at the linearity of a business, we say our business takes off, it goes a nice straight line. But it doesn't. How often, Dustin, have you guys had alternative ideas?
We started with something and we are not
even close
to that
right.
something.
So you started down this path and then you hit this idea and it went like this.
Yeah.
And you started investigating it and you then terminated that one and just kept going this way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And then as you're going that direction, you had this another idea and you went like this and you terminated it again. The key is how long do you continue the original path before you jump to the other one? The risk, the danger, the thing that's going to kill you as a business is if you jump too soon. And if you jump too soon, everybody goes, you're flighty. You have no idea what you're doing, you have no plan, you have no dedication. You're just wasting my money. You have to stick to the original idea until that original idea proves to be economically unviable, right? And that is the art of the pivot. The art of the pivot is to convince your investors, to convince your employees how much better this new idea is and why we must shift to the new idea. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples and we're going to talk about it. Just to give you, and then we're going to go, let me give you an example of ag energy and the pivots that we did. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want you to see why we pivoted each step and how I brought people along with me. Then we're going to come back and start talking a little bit more in detail about some of your own businesses and what are the types of pivots that can be accomplished. I want to be clear here is that you are going to pivot. Your idea is not going to be what you get into production with. It might be a little bit of a tweak. It might be a major tweak. The danger is that if you're going along here in a line and you're looking at this idea and this idea and this idea and this idea, and then this idea, and now you're running all of these across. Now what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different businesses. What happens then?
Spread too thin.
You're spread too thin and you go broke. You don't sleep because you're trying to pursue all the ideas all the time. If you're going to switch, you need a dump. What did I make the comment the other day when we were talking about all the different possibilities of what you could do? I told Owen what?
Choose just one thing to work on.
One thing. Do one thing and do that one thing really well. When that one thing succeeds and goes off on its own, then we can start bringing in a second one. And Michael's not here right now, but we were picking on Michael. What happens when you get that second one up and running? You're still keeping the first one going, but you're putting effort onto that second product. You need help. But that's when you bring help in, is when you start getting too thin. But set product one is producing profit. Product two is not up to speed yet. But you gotta have product two because eventually you're gonna saturate the market with product one. That's called growth. And so therefore you have to grow your staff. This is death to the company. You basically pivot out and it's just all over the place and everybody's gonna go in, who are you? What is your business, right? Ever feel that way, Dustin?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you should, because sometimes we question, who are you guys, right? Everybody loves to tease you about your name, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Filocycle?
Fila.
You're doing absolutely nothing with that, okay?
Yeah.
Does that sound familiar? What's ag energy producing?
Biochar.
No energy. We have nothing to do with energy anymore. But the name has already been incorporated and everybody knew who we were based on Ag Energy, so we just keep going with it, right? Right. But during the merger, what did they do? They merged the two companies together and called one Phytelligence. We had Phytelligence, which nobody could spell, and we had Ag Energy, which everybody goes, doesn't produce any energy. What's the business called?
Energy.
Qualterra. Quality dirt. Right? Okay, because that's what we would do. The two companies work together on making quality dirt. Okay? Like Qualterra. Right? Because nobody wants to buy anything from a company called Quality Dirt. We don't actually sell dirt. We actually improve the product, the quality of the stuff that you already have. Right? But let's take a look at that business. So it started off here, and our business was what? I mentioned the other day.
It was energy from biofuel.
Fisher, Trope, P-S-C-H, S-C-H. Got it. Damn, Germans put in too many letters. Okay, 4 consonants in a row. All right, it's great. It's German. I do believe they use 26-sided dice when they go and write words. Just roll it. I put that letter in there. Most of the words you don't actually pronounce. Okay, so that was our product. So we were going to take straw to liquid fuel. And we started building a gasifier. We got the gasifier, the prototype gasifier going, and we were starting to work on the platinum catalyst bed to make it into diesel fuel. And I started looking at the price of the platinum catalyst bed, and I started looking at the price of our fuel, and it came back that we were at best in production would be $15 per gallon. At the time, diesel was selling for $3. Not a really good business model, is it? 5 times the price to get clean, organic diesel. Kerosene, actually. High quality kerosene. By the way, how much does kerosene sell for? Last year, I checked the price of kerosene at Home Depot, and it was $75 for a 5-gallon can. So what is that price?
$15 a gallon.
$20 a gallon, right? 15 or 20?
15.
15. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could compete on that. I could go back and make that work now. Selling into the kerosene market. Right? So when we're looking at that, right, that's because the prices have gone stupid since 2008, 2009. All right, but we said, all right, that's not going to work, but I have a gasifier. So I got my gasifier. And it's producing syngas. What else can I do with syngas? Well, syngas is hydrogen plus CO. Burns equivalent to methane. I started looking around and I saw there are, I'm going to put it right over here, there's 9,000 central pivots in Washington State. There's 125,000 in the US, central pivots. Each one needs 60 horsepower on the average water pump. National average is 60 horsepower per pivot. So when you go to 100 Circle Farm out by Prosser, they have 100 central pivots, each with a 60 horsepower pump. Talking to Al Fountain over on Horseheaven Hills, he had 1,000 horsepower down in the Columbia River. He had 500 horsepower halfway up the hill, and then he had 60 horsepower at each and every one of his pivots, and he had 55 pivots. His power bill monthly was $58,000. And he was paying 3.8 cents a kilowatt hour. So I said, can I take this gas and use the straw from these wheat fields to generate electricity to run a sprinkler? Did the math go, I can do that. I can produce electricity and I can do that. So we're going to come around here. And so I had to talk to board. And I went into the board of directors and said, here's our fuel. Here's what's going on. Using the same machine that we have already built, that's already producing gas, I can dump it into a generator. Here's my market. 9,000 pivots in Washington State, 125,000 pivots nationwide. Each of our machines costs $250,000. We hit 10% of that market. we're happy. And why did I think I could get 10% of the market? Farmers like to do it themselves. They're using their wheat straw. There's enough wheat straw under a pivot sprinkler to run it the next year. All they have to do is feed straw to it every day. Not bad, right? And then we started thinking about all the other markets where you could go to it. Well, what about the sugar beet processing plant? Uses a lot of steam and a lot of energy. What do they do with all those sugar beets? Started thinking about the olive industry. How many of you ever went and bought a can of black olives? You ever find a pit in one of them? Not often. Where'd all the pits go? Into the dump. Guess what that pit holds? Olive oil. Okay, it's the pit. That's where you get the olive oil. There's olive oil in that pit. You know how much energy is in olive pits? Oh my God, it was a tremendous amount of energy. It's a phenomenal process. Okay, so we started looking at all these other agricultural groups out there and realizing how much energy is being thrown away. The one industry we could not figure out how to make it work was the meat processing industry, which is always saying tons and tons and tons of animal fat, which is just pure oil. Now, if I could figure out how to make that stuff into electricity, I'd be a billionaire. Okay, problems that kept leaking out the bottom. All right, so when we're looking at this, does this look like a good pivot? Does this make economic sense? What did I have to convince the board? That the investment that you put in so far was not wasted. Not one penny was wasted. We just changed the end goal. All the equipment that we built, because it ends up being the machine that we were building was actually that size for 660 horse. Just serendipity, it ended up being exactly the same size than what I was trying to produce before. Does this sound like a good idea? Board thought so. So we're moving along and kind of going, well, everybody's now making electric cars. I wonder if I could take this H2 plus CO and get rid of the CO and make just pure hydrogen gas and refill cars with hydrogen gas and build the hydrogen gas network. And you know what I wanted to use? Russian thistles. Your dad was how they posted this, by the way. What are Russian thistles? Anyone know? You know what a Russian thistle is. Those great big gray tumbleweeds that roll down the highway when you hit them with your car, it feels like you just ran over a cow. That will wipe out and break your dash if you hit them hard enough. Every time the wind blows, they go running across the damn countryside, all over the Central Basin. I wanted to put a plant in at Vantage that just took the Russian thistles that are blowing and catching on the fence lines and run them through a machine and produce hydrogen gas out of them. And refill hydrogen cars right there in Vantage. Put another one in Moses Lake. Okay? Are there any Russian thistles in Moses Lake? I think Moses Lake is covered in Russian thistles. Yeah. Okay. All right. This is like a great idea. Why didn't we pursue it? What's the money? No cars. Yeah, I can do it. I can put the refueling stations out there. That was one of the biggest problems. There was no hydrogen-powered cars anywhere. What was the second problem? No farmer in the right mind would go out and bail up Russian thistles for me. I finally paid one enough money, he went out and bailed up some bales for me to test. I found that the hydrogen content of a Russian thistle is 4 times that of wheat straw. Incredible amounts of hydrogen gas in a Russian thistle because of all the seeds in it. But nobody would be willing to go and plant Russian thistles for me to go out and bale. You're smirking. It's the bane of every farmer out there. They hate Russian thistles because once they're in your field, you can't get rid of them. Russian thistle is a really unique plant. So when we look at soil and clay, it's a combination of silica, silicon dioxide, and then you have aluminum, Al2O3, and H2O. And I don't know the exact numbers, but that's what makes up clay. Russian thistle is the only plant in the world that can steal the water off of the clay and break it back into sand. It actually ruins the clay in the soil and eats it. It doesn't need to rain for Russian thistle to sprout. It just needs clay. And it destroys your soil. That is why the farmers hate this stuff. Oh, it'll take water out of the air, it'll take water out of the soil, but it'll also break down the clay. Phenomenal biology involved in that thing, which is why it's such a nightmare of a plant. But anyway, so nobody was willing to plant it. I couldn't get a feedstock, and nobody had any cars yet. So what did we do with that particular pivot? Nexted it. And my board of directors said, good, you're wasting time. Get back to making that, get back to the windmills. All right, or back to the gasifiers. Now, I'm working with, taking on my first machine. We went down to the Colfax Fair, had it running, walked out to the Colfax Fair, had it there so everybody could see the thing run. And then we were told by the safety office, you can't turn that on while people are in the fairgrounds. Okay, so we shut it off. But everybody was really excited about the machine, about making it run with a generator and powering the sprinklers. An old farmer came up to me and said, what are you doing with all the char that you're throwing away? Or the char that you have? I said, I'm throwing it away. It's just ash. And he goes, I will give you $1,500 per ton for the char. Ends up being we make a ton of char a day. We only produce $700 worth of electricity a day, but I can make $1,500 on biochar. Not running the generator, which kept plugging up full of tar, and we had to clean it every 5 days because we hadn't got the filtering system done around. We were working on that. Does that sound like a good product? Still the same machine, but the farmer's willing to pay me for it because he got a 10% increase in yield. 10% on wheat. So we started investigating that. Didn't pivot to it yet, but we started investigating it. What took me over the top was another guy came back to me, and I'm going to put it down here. He offered me $80 per cubic foot if I'd put it 1 cubic foot bags, because that's the price that you buy really bad biochar from at Home Depot. And we were making really high quality biochar. And he put it to his cannabis plant, his marijuana plant, and he got a 100% increase in yield. He was getting $2,000 per plant on harvest, and he got $4,000 per harvest. And then I don't know if you guys are all marijuana people, but anyway, his buds used to be 4 or 5 inches long, and I have pictures on my computer of 14-inch long ones that are 4 inches in diameter. And he'd cut those things off, dry them, put them inside of giant test tubes and sell them for $500 a piece. And then he was making not $2,000 a plant. Through proper marketing, he got to $10,000 per plant. Okay. What is $80 a cubic foot in dollars per ton? Well, that ends up being $18,000 per ton. Do you think I should pivot? I took those numbers, I took that test data, I went back to the board. The board was opposed to me going and helping the marijuana industry. Then they look at the $18,000 a ton and said, okay, you're pivoting. That's when you go, this is stupid. What did we do at this point? Disconnect the generator and sold it. Actually, we have still one sitting on your dad's place, I think. Probably still is sitting out there, filled full of char, okay? We sold the other ones, right? Why do we dump the generators? I get $700 a day from electricity. I'm getting $18,000 an hour from biochar. Do I need to pivot? Yes, you pivot. Okay, let's go and continue on. This sounds like a great idea. Was it a great idea? Bad idea. Went years. What's the problem with it?
Limited demand.
No, the demand was high.
Interesting.
Stone customers. No, I'm not joking. They don't remember meeting you a year ago. Turnover rate. I'll write that up here. Is 2 years. Each marijuana operation in Washington State rotated ownership every 2 years. So you convince somebody to go and buy this product, you sell it to them, they get a big yield the next year, they farm 1 more year, and then you gotta go back and tell them, oh, you bought this stuff last year. And you have to convince them that they bought the stuff the previous year. and that to increase their yield, I'm not joking, we had to do the math for them. They would then buy another $250,000 worth of product. They'd get a huge yield, take their money and leave, sell the business. Now you have to go to the next owners and convince them to do the same thing. Then you have to go to the next owner and convince them to do the same thing. So where we had 60 customers one year, the next year we only had 30 of them left. The following year, none of those original ones were there, and we had a whole new group of people that we're trying to sell to. Do you see the problem? And when there's a new ownership, they get a new biologist. And then you have to educate the new biologist why this is making a difference in their product. You have to show them the numbers, you have to show them the test data, you have to show them all the information, and convince them that what they've been doing for 10 years as a private grower is wrong. You need to do it this way. So what's the problem with our customer? Well, I looked at they're fundamentally broken. They're stoned off the gourd. It's not that they were smoking the product. I'll tell you the story of our salesman walking in there. He was 70 years old, trying to sell the biochar. Walked in, asked the guy if he'd like to have a repeat order. He bought $250,000 last year. He goes, well, did it do any good? He goes, well, have you run the numbers? He had spreadsheets laying all over his table in front of him. And he goes, well, there's the numbers for you. And he flips it around, he does the math for him and says, yeah, you made an extra $4 million last year buying our product. He goes, God, we should do it again. Yeah, you should. Okay. Took him a little bit, finally convinced him to write a check for $250,000. He goes, how did we use it? We'll come show you. He walked out to the car. He'd only been there a half hour, called the office and said, I'm too stoned to drive. Somebody's got to come get me. And that was just sitting in the office. There's so much THC in the air, they couldn't remember what they were doing. Our board said, get out of that industry, find something else to do. So we started doing experimentation with a whole bunch of plants, running them out, and finally ended up with 3 products right now. This was the final pivot, and we've been running this pivot since. Ends up being that hops are in the same family as marijuana. Hops don't make you stoned, and there has to be 10,000 acres of hops in Yakima. And we convinced the guy out there that he needs to buy biochar at 5 tons to the acre, but he wasn't going to pay it. But he wanted it in a truckload. He didn't want it in bags, so he was willing to pay $6,000 a ton in truckloads. Am I still making more than electricity? I got rid of the manual part of having to do the bagging. I'm still selling it at $6,000 a ton. It still doesn't make sense to make electricity, and we have one customer who's taken everything we can produce for a while. The prior year, that's this year, the year before, we had a new apple orchard going in. The experimentation in apple orchards, normally it's 4 years till you can pick apples off an apple tree. You gotta get them mature enough. We took a full year off the growth cycle. Great, so they could pick on year 3 instead of year 4. Does that make a difference to an apple orchard? Huge amounts. And the best part about it is that when you go to you dig a big hole, you drop in a bucket full of biochar, you stick into the tree, and off you're going. Tried the same thing with the grape industry, which is 3 years to harvest. We got it down to 2. Then when you start looking at the yield, side-by-side yield, the trees were taller. The trees were fuller. And they got higher yields off the trees and higher yields off the grapes. So right now we have planted over 500,000 apple trees with this methodology. So does that sound anything like ag energy? No, but what does it sound like? We're making money, okay? We're keeping people employed. So we're doing what we're supposed to do, which is making money for the investors, making money for the employee, keeping people employed. Yeah.
What was the timeline on all of this for pivot wise? Like, what, as a company, where were these? Was it, most of them within the first 5 years, or was
2008. This would have been. Actually, that was 9. Excuse me. We started in 9. So this would be 2011.
Wow. Okay.
2010, I'm going to say about early 2011 that we went to the gas. This was 2012. This was 2013 to 2014. This whole thing here. And this was 2016 More like 18.
Okay.
2018, we finally got it after fighting with the marijuana industry for 4 years. Just finally, we're done.
Wow, interesting.
And then we keep adding, there's some guys growing gigantic fields of spinach in Texas with the stuff. Okay, cannabis is related to what plant? Hemp. Hemp is used for rope. We're sending truckloads upon truckloads down to Mississippi and Arkansas where they're growing hemp because they're doubling their yield. Okay, so does that kind of explain the pivot? So the pivot isn't the fact that you failed, it's that you have no control over the market. So when we look at this pivot away from marijuana, it's the fact that our customers were idiots. I can say that because they're all stoned, right? And they didn't last very long. Do you want to sell to the drug industry? Not a reliable revenue stream. It was legal that we were doing this, okay? But the problem was too many of the people were using their own product.
High off your own supply.
What's that?
High off your own supply.
Exactly, which makes them a really bad business person. So let's see, who else is a really bad business person? Who do you not want to sell to? Any of you guys ever work at a bar? Do you really want to deal with a bunch of drunks every night? Yeah, they spend a lot of money, but they're a real pain in the butt, right? They're unreliable. They order drinks and you mix them a drink and you realize their credit card is already maxed out and they have no other way to pay, right? So, there's all kinds of problems with that, right? When we look at so where else can we have problems? Children as customers. What's the problem of selling to children's toys? The children aren't the customers. The customer is the parent. And the parent doesn't want them to have it. So who are you marketing to? The whiny child that spends their time whining at the parent, I really need this toy, I really need this toy. And then mom and dad or grandma finally give in and give them the damn toy so they quit whining so much. Is that a good market? No, not a really reliable market. Well, it is a reliable market, but it is a very difficult market.
You're marketing to two different things.
You have to market to two different people, right? So use as an example, marketing to different people. When we're looking at how do we finally get to all this? I started doing field research in 2009 on every single plant we could think of. We have test data all over Washington State. We have soil samples, we have soil meters. We went out there and test soil, put a biochar on a wheat field, put out soil automatic data acquisition systems, collecting rain, collecting wind, collecting solar incident, collecting moisture content, all over your dad's farm. And what was the biggest problem? Crows and deer. Between deer and crows, I'm not sure which I hated more. The dang crows crapped inside our water collection system, which would plug up the holes so it wouldn't measure any rain flow. And the deer kept eating the cables. I don't know why deer would go up there. They bite our data cables in half and chew them up. We thought it was mice at first, but later saw the deer actually doing it. Stupid animals. All right. So when we're looking at, okay, what happened here? Here's the matter, we didn't get our math done right. We made a math error about the cost of the catalyst bed. I didn't understand all the costs, all the control systems. I looked up some catalyst beds, but not the catalyst bed I needed. And once I started diving into the actual construction of that thing, I realized we weren't going to get there because it was going to be way, way too hard and way too expensive. And the price of platinum went up. Not a good thing, right? What happened at the same time? Anyone know? That's when people started cutting the catalytic converters out of the bottom of cars. Because they are the catalytic converter is a platinum reactor. So people started cutting them, melting them down, getting the half an ounce of platinum out of them, and selling the platinum. But so what caused the platinum price to go up? It had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with our plan. But our plan failed because a mineral that we were depending on quadrupled in price. Okay? So when we get that, so that changes it. This has nothing to do with engineering. You know, it has to do with, we didn't anticipate a big enough margin on the platinum. This one, I'm glad we didn't go that direction, but we started down that path and it was a dead end. Okay, but when we looked here, this is just serendipity. This old guy came up and says, hey, I want to buy that stuff. How much do we sell to the farmers, wheat farmers? 2 truckloads. Because by that time we found out the marijuana industry. Okay? So, how did the marijuana industry happen? Ended up being the best friend of one of our investors, happened to be a grower, and he was trying to find a good source of biochar, and the investor said, hey, if you want biochar, Philip's selling a bunch of it. So I took him over, kind of going, I'm not into marijuana at all. But anyway, so we took him a bag of it, let him try, and he calls me down to his basement, and I got higher than a kite as I go down to his basement, and as we see these plants are this high, and he's got these other plants that are this tall. It says, that's the difference, double the yield. Okay? So when we're looking at these pivots, let's talk about what leads to a pivot. Let's talk about your own business. What can lead to a pivot? Okay? So what can lead to a pivot for you?
Let's say it eats away at the clear coat.
It eats clear coat. You're gonna have to pivot to something different. Or somebody else comes up with it before you. Now you're gonna have to pivot, right? We go back through and find out vinegar is not really good for animals. Okay, okay. No, it's been around for way too many generations. Okay, look at yours. What could cause yours to go haywire?
One thing that we've already had to pivot on is initially I was trying to use LiDAR scanning, similar to what the fingernail one was, and I ran into, wow, this is hard to implement. Let's switch to photogrammetry.
Yeah, so there's a pivot. It's just a small technical pivot, but it saves you a lot of money with respect to technology that you need. It's a small pivot still heading down that path. But let's say we end up that somebody comes up with a new shoe that automatically adjusts itself. Some new memory foam, right? You know, these memory metals and things like that. Come put memory metal inside the shoe so you step on it once and now that shoe's permanently that shape. You're screwed, right? But I don't think anybody's ever gonna put memory metal inside of a shoe. Way too expensive, right? What could affect you guys to pivot? Well, you're right, you already pivoted several times. So we're already familiar with the dancing that you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at that, when we're talking about the pivots, you guys were working on pivots yesterday. The pivot you're making now is what? Your time keeps going away while you're waiting for documentation. It's slipping away on you, and you have to keep pivoting your process and what you're doing in order to adjust the reduced time frame, which means you need to adjust what you're delivering.
Precisely.
Okay? You guys are just waltzing right now. You haven't picked a business yet. You got an industry. You got all kinds of potentials.
We're saturated industry at that.
Is it saturated?
Photo books are everywhere, yeah.
But does that mean there's no room for something unique? And this is the thing Matthew and I chatted at length last night. He believes that whoever he's actually in that type, he's a marketing major and data analysis. And he goes, there's so much capacity in this market. He says if all you have to do is find a unique hook and you're in. So this is where we need to talk, you guys need to start talking about how do we get that unique hook? What is not being offered? What is not being out there? And you guys are still kind of swirling in ideas, and we'll get you nailed down in about 3 weeks. This conversation we're having today is way ahead of where you guys are at. Okay? You're not pivoting right now, you're still in the pool of ideas, right? So we got to find something. Now, when we look at your industry, I don't know a huge amount about what you're doing, other than what Owen has told me. But when you're looking at costume production and custom costume production for Renaissance fairs, have you gone into the production room yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay, before you leave, you two ought to go in there and see the toys we've got. That entire room over there is a sewing room. That's the dressing room. There's 4 sewing machines in there, one of them capable of 1/4-inch thick leather. And we have a serger, And we have lots of toys.
I'm excited now.
I put over $12,000 into that room. So we didn't get just a leather sewing machine. We got the best industrial sewing machine I could find. Yes, you can run it. After Mr. Parrish says, yea, verily, you can run it. Okay? So when you're looking at your early stage production, and the reason I'm pointing at Noemi, she took sewing classes in her youth, and she's going to be she works for me, and she represents the ideation lab with respect to the sewing. I'm not asking you to do any sewing. She's still mad at my mother. All right. My mom yelled at all the people that work at sewed under her, rip it out. That's all I ever heard from her.
I'm traumatized.
From the senior thing?
Yeah, from taking classes with my grandma.
Oh.
Yes, she was not nice. She was nicer to you as a granddaughter than she was to her own daughters. Deb still has nightmares.
Yeah.
All right, my sister still has nightmares from my mother yelling, "Tear it out!" every time she worked for weeks, and then have to tear the whole dress apart. Anyway, so when you look at what pivots would you be making? So as we look at Renaissance, what cosplay is another huge industry that is looking. So, do you want to do cosplays in Renaissance? No, you want to focus on one at first. Become well known in that industry before you branch into another costume industry. Where else do we need costumes? Rest of you guys in the room. Movies. Theater. Is there any theaters near here?
There's many.
There's one right down the two buildings over. Yeah,
Fun
actually,
fact,
one building over.
I've worked in there already.
Yeah, right. And they've already been over here.
Yeah.
So the costume production person has already been over here, and she
Jerry?
wants to get. What's that?
J-Ray?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
And
her.
you need to drag her over here. I told her that she and her production company can use this room to produce costumes or modify costumes for any of the plays that are going on here. When we're looking at that, all right, could you become a theater costume producer? Yes. Could you do movie sets? Yes. So when we take a look at the Lord of the Rings, I read an article about the people making swords there. They hired 300 swordsmiths from around the world to produce the swords for that movie. And chainmail. Because they wanted realistic, real chainmail. So these guys had to actually make chainmail the old-fashioned way, swords and shields the old-fashioned way. They didn't worry about making them super sharp, but they made them impact resistant. They didn't want to hurt anybody, but when they hit sword to sword, they didn't want them to shatter. And the thousands of swords that they had to produce. And they were paid a fortune.
I bet.
What's that?
I bet.
Well, because it's a dying art. Well, it's not dying anymore. They got a lot of people trained, and they started training apprentices, and they were bringing as many apprentices as they could to come and join them in building the swords. Those weren't machined out swords. They were actually, because Peter Jackson wanted them made the proper way.
Oh, so like actual.
Yes, blacksmith.
Hammer and black sword.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's why Forge and Fire took off, because now you have all these artisans that have been trained who want to participate in that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, now all of a sudden you got a TV show spun off from all those people. I love that show, by the way.
That's our go-to whenever grandparents come over.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right. My great-grandfather was a blacksmith in Dusty. You ought to go talk to your Uncle Eric about the stories about Grandpa Oswald. He was also a weapons hoarder during World War II. And nobody knew that, and Eric knew that he had a lot of ammunition hidden in the walls of his shop. And then his shop caught fire about 8 years ago, and all the fire departments are pulling up there, and Eric was the fire chief for Dusty, and he was running up telling everybody to scatter. Because there's tons of ammunition in the walls between the 2x4s. And then it all started going off. And everybody dove for cover.
That was a good fireworks show, I'm assuming.
Oswald was a little nuts, but okay. If you he traveled around shoeing horses in the 20s and 30s. That's all he did all day long, was shoeing horses, because he had 50 horses pulling every single one of those combines out there. His job is to do the shoeing. So when you look at that, he pivoted to sword making. But all right, so now get back to your industry. What are the pivots that you may have to make? You're talking about targets, right? So somebody else could come up with a cheaper organic target than you have. All right, that's often an obvious pivot. We've talked about all the other products you can make. So you're gonna be investigating those. What if you find one that isn't being serviced, that has a high margin? Right? So we come back to that non-serviced industry that has very few parts being sold into it at very high cost. You may consider pivoting, but you need to make sure you run the numbers. I can think of a whole bunch of stuff in that industry there where you could make money at, right? Where you can make a product. But if you find one with a very high profit margin, is a high profit margin because nobody's looking at it, or there's nobody buying, not enough people buying them. So this is where we have to really dive into the data, where I keep saying you gotta go out and talk to Mark Pond and really understand that industry, how many people are in that industry, how many people are buying. Okay? So when we look at, so all of you have a potential for a pivot.
No,
No.
I was just checking.
Okay.
Boy.
Yes.
So it looks like the pivots are like no-brainers almost. When it's identified, it seems to be a no-brainer. But you know, from the lean startup that I read, a pivot is an incredibly risky move to take, especially as a startup.
Yes, it is a very risky move. Okay, this was not a one day I decided to switch from doing liquid fuel to electricity.
Right.
That was a 4-month process of trying to convince all the investors that I wasn't screwing them over, getting them to agree on the pivot. And so and keeping their confidence in our engineering. Each one of these was a very long discussion. None of them were, oh, we're just going to pivot from selling biochar to the wheat industry and we're going to sell in the marijuana industry. That was a huge discussion due to the nature of the marijuana industry. And the lawyers got involved saying, can you actually take cash from them? Because at the time they couldn't use a bank account. You know, what are we going to do with the cash when somebody pays me $18,000 a ton in cash? That was an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, we resolved the issue. Well, actually, we didn't resolve the issue. The state of Washington suddenly said, yeah, they can use banks. Okay, that's what was the leverage. So we were looking at this particular pivot for a long time until the banks were allowing them to deposit their cash directly. So when we're looking at these pivots, they were all, I gave you the no-brainer version.
Right.
Every one of them was a risk of losing my investors, risk of being fired as a CEO for changing the direction of the company. Every one of them took many lunches with it, one-on-one lunches with the board, with the investment group, with the major shareholders. I lost employees going to marijuana. They refused to support the drug industry. I didn't think I'd lose them, but I did. Okay? Actually, I was kind of happy that one of them left. But anyway, pain in the neck. Anyway, all of you should start reading some of these textbooks that I have upstairs. That was a
lean startup.
Lean Startup, yeah.
It was like a whole.
The Lean Startup is a very good book if you guys want to read. I want you guys, we're going to give you some assignments for Saturday of some stuff I want you to start preparing, okay, for our Saturday's discussion. But Lean Startup is a very good book. Actually, Dustin still has it. You haven't returned that one, have you?
No, that one you got. I took a couple others.
You
so.
took a couple others, okay. So there's a half dozen books in my office on how to be an entrepreneur. You should take the time to start reading some of this stuff and start learning about how to be an entrepreneur.
That's one of my majors is entrepreneurship.
Yes, there's a lot to it.
There really is.
There's a lot to it. A lot of it is finesse, okay? The finesse of doing the pivot. So today's discussion is just about pivoting, but that pivot is not taken lightly. It's not done in a hurry. It's done after you talk to everybody, you get everybody's opinion, and if you're, by the way, how do we treat the board? Right, when the board is making a comment, if the board is not unanimous, don't do it. You only make a decision when the board is unanimous about the decision. If they're not unanimous, then you need to go out and either convince the other person, or you've got to go back into the drawing board and figure out why. What is their opposition? Because if they have an opposition, there's a reason for their opposition to the pivot. You will not have board members that are the same. Every board member brings their own unique experience, their own unique knowledge, and you need to be dependent. You put them on the board because of their knowledge. And if their knowledge said, this is a dumb idea, don't do this, don't do it. even if the other 4 are saying, yeah, that's a great idea, 1 out of the 5, I had 5, 1 out of the 5 says no. The agreement was among the board, no. It has to be unanimous before we move forward. Okay? So that takes a long time to educate everybody about why we should pivot and where the money and how that's going to affect the business. Yes.
So what chunk, so you as the CEO clearly had a lot of your time going towards the current, persevering through the current product, but then managing the time to research into that pivot. How much of your workforce did you have spend doing research on the pivot before you actually did the full pivot?
Typically, as a PhD, I was wanting to make sure I did the research.
It was you as
You
an
just,
individual.
that's what Saturdays were for. Saturday and Sunday, I had to work on that.
Wow, okay.
I didn't sleep much for several years. But I dove into a lot of it, and then I went down, and Tom, who's the other founder, he and I would go sit down and spend an afternoon just going through everything that I discovered. He would then go out, being the finite element and numerical methods, he would go out and he would revalidate what my calculations were. I'd spend a lot of time one-on-one with several of the board members who are also business experts. Okay, here's the technical issue we're having. Here's the impact that I'm seeing. Here's my pro forma of what it means to go the direction we're going, to go this other direction, and sit down with the pro forma, get them to talk to me about how the financial impact, what is the pace that we should pivot, if we pivot at all. And once you've gone through that, okay, you've got weeks into this. That's why I'm saying this is not a overnight decision, any of these. These take months. Yes, you have to run your main job. But the way that I set it up, I was one who's exploring alternatives, where Tom was focused on the delivery of the design and the production of the product. And then once we got the design done, we brought Jake on, and Jake was a production engineer. And Jake's job was to take that design and get it built. And Tim was an electrical engineer who actually did all the control systems and was in charge of it. Tim also was worked under me in a previous job as a test engineer. Tim then started putting all the test plans together. I left them with the design, and I walked away from the gasifier, and I focused on, are we going the right path? My primary job after the first few years, bring in money and look at the fastest way we can grow this thing into profitability. So I'd explore a lot of different ideas, a lot of different stuff, and I ran the soil research for quite a while till we hired in somebody to do the soil research. So the idea was keep me focused on bringing money in the door and keeping the investors happy and making sure that we're going the right path. So I focused not on the technical, so I'd encourage you the same thing. Get out of the technical. You've got other people do the technical. You should be looking at the bigger picture of where are we going? Are we going the right direction? Do we have the revenue coming in the door or equity sales to keep us afloat?
Right.
And if it's writing a grant, and I wrote a number of federal grants to fund the company, that was solely me.
Yeah. Did that influence any of your pivots at all, what grants were available? Because I know in my research, just in Washington State, I saw that Qualterra did win a pretty big Washington State grant of like $250,000 for just sustainability initiatives. Was that?
Yeah, that was a recent one they did. I wrote 3 different grants at Ag Energy through the U.S. Forest Service because we had all these forest fires and you got all these burned trees. Come up with something to do with the burned trees. Let's make them into biochar and put it back out there.
Right. Interesting.
So that was what we got a bunch of I got paid to do a bunch of studies, and then I hired an engineer to actually run the grants. So once I got the grant in the door, we made a 25% profit off the grant, and then paid him to actually do the analysis. So that's a great way to bring money in the door. And there's a lot of federal grants out there. You guys, there's a whole bunch that you would qualify for.
Yeah, that's what we're doing now is the research for that.
Yeah. So dive into the EPA grants.
Yep.
There's a whole bunch that will fit your category.
Yep.
Okay. Yes.
So, I wasn't hearing right. When do you pivot exactly? Besides when you hit a roadblock, or when do you want to take an approach? Like if it isn't broke,
You're
fix it.
always keeping an eye out. You're always looking, can I make this more profitable? Can I make more money going this other direction? Do I add that as a secondary product? If my first product is not making me any money and I'm not going anywhere with it and no one's buying it, it's time to pivot. Yes, but that's too late. You need to be watching and producing. So one of the things we're gonna cover, which we haven't got to yet, is pro formas, which are financial projections. And your projection is saying that we're gonna be bringing in revenue of this amount by this time. If you're not bringing that revenue in, why? Why you're not bringing revenue in? There's something wrong with your product if you're not getting sales. Now you gotta, so you're gonna project out, I need to be growing at this rate. If you're not growing at that rate and you're watching your actuals versus your projected. And so when we look at, we got another board in here somewhere. Okay. So if we're looking at our time across here, dollars on that side, we're saying our revenue's gonna go like this, and then it's gonna take off. And that is what our projections say. But we come back and find our actuals go like this. What's the problem?
No bueno.
You're losing money every single day. You didn't make the curve. Why didn't we make this turn? We need to be looking right here. Why are we not turning? You need to start asking that question. You may not change anything, but it's called earned value management. Is basically we use it when we did the military products, and you're projecting what's going to go on out here by looking at the small changes back in here. Okay, and we're going to get to those lessons later. Okay, there's whole classes on this, but when we're giving that direction, you want to say, oh, we're actually here. I need to do something, so I'm curving up this direction. I need to change that curve. Yes.
Okay, so like predicting where your market's gonna go.
You're trying to predict what your sales rate's gonna be months in advance. And when you don't make those sales, what's wrong with your product? What's wrong with, now, is it a problem with your product? Is it a problem with your marketing strategy? Is it a problem with, so a pivot might be changing what your marketing strategy is. Your pivot might be changing doesn't necessarily have to be your product. It might be your team. Do you need to pivot some of your team members? Put them in a better place that's a better fit. Or it might be bringing on a new team. So sometimes that risk is, we're not making any money, I need to hire another person. Now that sounds counterintuitive. We have no money, but I'm gonna hire another person, because maybe you don't have the right skill sets. You may have a pivot because your skill sets that your company has are not the skill sets that you need. We talked about that a while back, right? What skill sets do I have to go forward? I may need to bring on another person, even though I'm losing money, but if I bring this other person on, can they help me make this turn? Right? So the pivot can be on product. It can be because of the market. It can be because of the customer. Let's say you're approaching a certain customer segment and realize that customer is a bunch of tightwads and they're never gonna buy my product. Who has money that will pay for my product? Without changing the product, I just went and marketed to a different group. That might be your whole pivot.
Yeah.
Any component of your business can change or pivot because it's not working. As CEO or manager of your company, you have to continuously evaluate all the different factors of the business, and are they performing, are they reacting the way I want them to react? And if they're not reacting the way I want them to react, why?
And then you want to pivot before you hit that theoretical roadblock.
Yes. Yeah, you want to turn ahead of time. Smacking into the wall is not a good thing. I smacked into the wall a couple times. It nearly destroyed the company. You want to turn before you hit the wall. But you need to slowly turn ahead of the wall. The slower you make that change, the more carefully you make that change. You see, I do need a change. And you make a very slow change. How do we make a slow change with an employee? I need another skill set. Hire a consultant. And if some only needs you this long at the time. Get the information you need and then let them off. Don't make the commitment to a full-time employee until you need the full-time employee. Make a small change by hiring a consultant. Hire a temporary person. Okay, we're just not getting through the emails fast enough. Hire a temporary administrator, say your job is in charge of emails. I can't read them all. Answer the phone and do the emails. Can't guarantee a full-time job, but we'll hire you as a temp. Temp's a great way to go. Okay, don't write them a contract. Hire them as a temp, right? Then let them go once you get, or make them permanent. I hired a guy as a temp for a CEO, for an accountant. I needed some accounting done. I was getting behind at doing my accounting. I hired a young man right out of Gonzaga. Guess what? He's currently the CFO for Qualterra. He's never worked anywhere else. But while he was working there, he went back to school and got his CPA license. Okay? And he's been at Qualterra Ag Energy longer than anybody else in the entire business. Okay? I kind of laugh about that because he was only going to show up for 3 months and then was going to leave. He came as an intern and said, I already have another job. But after 3 months, he decided to stay. His other job was working for his uncle, and he got mad at his uncle, so I won out on the family battle. All right, but when we're looking at this, all right, are you seeing that, Michael, what that pivot can be?
Yeah.
That pivot can be anything. We're trying to anticipate it. The advantage of hiring a temp, you're kind of going, I really don't need this person. You haven't committed to them yet. You can get rid of them. The advantage of a consultant is, when can you fire a consultant? At any time, at lunch. They get back from lunch, we don't need you in the morning. Sorry, go. And they pack their stuff up and they leave. Okay? That's the contract with the consultant, right? You're getting behind in your CAD modeling. Okay, who's doing a bunch of CAD modeling? You guys. Didn't get behind your CAD modeling, right? What are you going to do? Hire a CAD consultant, right? You get back and you need finite element analysis. Are you going to do it?
I don't know how.
No, hire somebody. Yeah, don't do that. It takes a lot of time, a lot of skill. It takes years and years of practice to know the boundary conditions. Go hire a Handy Johnson's company. He does it, and he does it faster than anybody. He charges you $500 an hour, but he typically take him 2 hours what takes you 3 months. You come out way ahead. He's that good, right? So when we're looking at this kind of stuff, you guys following this? So when we're saying, okay, I want to switch to a different market, what am I going to do to switch to that different market? Research. I may hire a consultant to help me do research to make sure I'm not making a mistake going to a different market, right? But how much time do you have? All the time in the world? You've got to do it quickly, right? To get ahead of the curve.